So I want to introduce our next speakers. They are all from the group Activating Fluxus. And we have Dr. Hanna Hölling, Dr. Aga Wielocha, and as well Josephine Ellis. And so they are all part of the Bern University of Applied Sciences, and they're the Activating Fluxus project. Dr. Hölling is a research professor in Bern, and her publications and teaching focus on art and cultural developments since the 60s and 70s, in particular aspects of time, change, materiality, and the archive. She's also published on Pike and also on performance as well. Dr. Wielocha is a researcher and collection care specialist who specializes in contemporary art. She's also currently in Bern, a postdoctoral fellow. And she earned her PhD in Amsterdam, as well as worked at Hong Kong's M+ Museum. So she also has quite a global perspective. And Josephine Ellis is a doctoral candidate in Bern in the Activating Fluxus project. She's recently received her master's degree in the history of art from the University College London, and is also focused on the 1960s and 70s, but particularly with a focus on Southeast Asia during the Second British Empire. So from the three of them, we'll hear now about the Activating Fluxus project. Let's have a round of applause to welcome them to the virtual stage.
Again, thank you so much for the invitation on behalf of the three of us and also our associate scholars. It's such a great pleasure to be back, even if digitally, to the Ru area, for which my heart still keeps on beating. I spend there lots of my time. Thank you also so much to Nicole Grotte and Suk-Young Lee for this fascinating insights already. And yeah, let me start a presentation co-authored by Aga Wielocha, Josie Ellis, and myself. On one of the late spring evenings of May 2023, a sense of anticipation filled the air as we gathered around a longish table in a spacious room at Progr, an elegant auditorium of an artistic cultural center in Bern. We were part of the Research Apero, a public event organized to review the ongoing research activities of our research institute at the University of the Arts, Bern. As we settled into our seats, placed in front of us was a carefully crafted tuna fish sandwich on wheat toast with lettuce and butter, absent of mayo, accompanied by a warm bowl of soup. A simple yet refined lunch prepared with attention to detail. Our presence at this event was neither solely about sharing our research findings, nor about the culinary experience. The lunch acted as a catalyst, sparkling conversations that transcended the boundaries of disciplines and backgrounds. We wanted to break the traditional confines of academia and extend our research beyond the perimeter of the laboratory of lecture hall, where artistic expression could merge with critical inquiry. People eagerly shared their impressions of the meal, and the discussion soon delved into the deeper layers of the concept of this work, Fluxus, and the world surrounding it, as we were exploring through this event and through our research. It also delved into the question of what actually is the identical lunch, and how the identity of an open work persists, like the identical lunch, in relation to the ideas of history, contemporaneity, change, activation, and the appreciation of difference. Drawing on the author's continuing engagement with the identical lunch through research, enactment, and bodily engagement, including a quote-unquote non-identical variant that has been staged as a part of our departmental gatherings, and more on this variant you will hear shortly. This presentation will explore some of the challenges posed by this changeable artwork that comes into being through translations, across different cultures, spaces, and times, perhaps a truly one of the most kind of global artworks, Fluxus global artworks. And we'll also speculate what this means for the continuity of the work and of Fluxus more broadly. Let us now briefly delve into the historical context. While Knowles' first realization of the identical lunge reaches back to the 1969, the concept of the work has developed over several years. The piece originated in the artist's habit of regularly eating the same lunch at Riss Foods, a diner in the Chelsea neighborhood in New York. This custom had been observed by another Fluxus artist, Philip Corner, who proposed to formalize it into a performance and, quotes, mediation they could investigate together. Meditation they could investigate together, unquote. Following Corner's call, Knowles scored her routine, offering a means for others also to perform and transform it. Quote, the identical lunch, a tuna fish sandwich on wheat toast with lettuce and butter, no mayo, and a large glass of buttermilk or a cup of soup, was and is eaten many days of each week at the same place and about the same time, unquote. Knowles also invited other artists, friends, to perform the score at their leisure for the next 2 years. Over the course of the muse, Knowles collected receipts, notes, drawings, letters, and photos from these performances. In 1971, she published them in the Journal of the Identical Lunch, and the quote above stemmed just from this journal. But who was Alison Knowle? I bet many of you don't need an introduction. A revered figure at the age of 19, holds a significant place as one of the founding members of Fluxus. In the late 1950s, influenced by the avant-garde composer John Cage, she departed from silk-screen painting and embraced the realm of performative art, particular events, short performances that were conceptualized and popularized by her fellow artist, George Brecht. This shift led Knowles, despite her limited musical training, to explore the use of linguistic scores. Among her notable works, Make a Salad, whose first iteration saw the daylight in 1962 at ICA London, stands as a prominent example of a score-based piece, much like the identical lunch has evolved over time through numerous realizations. We would obviously wish to tell you more about Fluxus, but time constraints prevent us from delving into kind of common goals and attitudes of the artists associated with Fluxus. And nonetheless, it is worth mentioning that other Fluxus artists crafted and brought to life performance-based interventions referred to as situations, performances, or even based on instructions, or events based on instructions or propositions utilizing linguistic or graphical scores. And now I'm handing over to Aga, who will discuss the variants of the work.
Identical Lunch has been performed by Knowles publicly on many occasions around the world. In 2011, the artist was invited by the Museum of Modern Art in New York to enact it in its Café 2 as a part of historic performance series. A lunch participant recalls that Knowles appreciated the extraordinary preparation of the tuna, which was mixed by the café's chef with capers and olives, rather than extracted from a can. During the momentous Fluxus 15th anniversary celebrations in Wiesbaden in 2012, the identical lunch underwent a radical transformation driven by ecological concerns. Interestingly, this transformation got the artist's approval. Spanning a 100-meter-long table and attended by 500 guests, the identical lunch, now adorned with the subtitle variation, took on a new form. The sandwich was composed of a chopped egg, blended with mayo and onion, complemented by lettuce, and nestled between slices of a whole wheat toast. The buttermilk was replaced by a pink champagne, which was an innovative suggestion by Ben Patterson. Finally, a birthday cake adorned the table to culminate the event. In this photograph, believed to have been taken in the 1970s by an anonymous photographer, we are presented with the identical lunch consisting of a tuna sandwich and a glass of buttermilk placed on a stool covered with a cloth. This historical iteration inspired the display of the work in the 2012 exhibition Feast, Radical Hospitality in Contemporary Art at the Smart Museum in Chicago. The sandwich and a cup of buttermilk was placed on display under a transparent cake cover. This otherwise static display was interrupted by a regular replacement of the lunch components, introducing a performative or even ritualistic element. While the public was unable to sample the meal on display, they could purchase it in the museum cafe, selecting it from the lunch menu just as any other item. Paradoxically, the concept of identical lunch defies identity understood as a form of sameness maintained through and across space and time. While the instruction appears straightforward, the lunch itself can never achieve complete identicality. For example, each performance of the identical lunch requires procuring fresh ingredients, eliminating the possibility of exact replication. Moreover, the identical lunch continuously undergoes changes in form, ingredients, and content, influenced by evolving artist intentions. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it later. And actually, Knowles has since reconsidered the title of the performance, saying, and I quote here, actually, constant is a better word since it was never identical. A silkscreen series, Portraits of the Identical Lunch, portrays Alison's friends, including Machinus, during the identical lunch organized on the occasion of Machinus's 1969 New Year's Eve Flux Feast at Jonas Mecca's Cinematheque in the Flux House Cooperative. In this one-off event, participants were encouraged to consume the sandwiches with Alison hidden behind a shower curtain. Lacking the element of repetition accentuated in the score, social interaction and exchange as core elements of the identical lunch were preserved. As it persists over time, the identical lunch continued to shift its identity according to cultural, social, spatial, and temporal factors. The artist herself acknowledges the responsiveness of the work to the cultural setting. Reflecting of the impossibility of recreating the typical American lunch menu outside its original context, she states, "You would think that in Germany you can find a whole wheat bread. No. The best we could do was a whole wheat baguette. In Asia, I did not even try. I had pictures to show and then I would enjoy what was original for them. So what connected it to the identical lunch was that they could get me a regional tofu soup, as my lunch had been regional to me." As an even score, the identical lunch follows the operative logic of musical notation, which suggests that each performance is an equally valid instance of Knowles' work, varying in the degree of interpretation and adherence to the score. Nevertheless, the parameters of change can be difficult to detect. At times, they transcend the boundaries of what is commonly regarded as the same work. And an apt example is the identical lunch symphony staged by Knowles at the Smart Museum in Chicago. In the Fluxus tradition of adapting and responding to the scores of fellow Fluxus artists, this performance featured George Machinus's linguistic reinterpretation from 1971, which was based on Knowles' original score. The symphony embraced a double musical presence. Knowles' score was historically activated by Machinus and then interpreted by the student performers. The blenders took on the role of musical instruments producing sonic materiality. As the event unfolded, we witnessed Knowles giving instructions to performers seated around a table tasked with mixing the ingredients of the lunch in electric blenders. Knowles directed the mechanical symphony produced by the blenders, providing each individual one with an approval of the mixture produced by shifting their lids and tapping on them. And finally, inspired by the remarkable variability of the work and mindful of the ethical environmental implication of using tuna fish, The research team of Activating Fluxus decided in the spring of 2022 to begin staging the identical lunch consisting of kofta wrapped with iron during a reoccurring departmental gathering. And here is some pictures from our departmental meetings over the identical or not identical lunch. But little we did know that obtaining actual official permission from the artist to this iteration of the lunch in anticipation of the research apero would present a challenge. We wrote to the artist and eagerly awaited her response. And that's what we get. As for my performance activity, the identical lunch, it consists of a specific receipt for a tuna fish sandwich. If you make a lunch that's identical each day but isn't my recipe, that's your work, not mine. Alison Knowles, the identical lunch is a tuna fish sandwich on a wheat toast with lettuce and butter, no mayo, a cup of soup, and a glass of buttermilk. And now over to you, Josie.
In these lines, we can perceive the shift.
Sorry. I have to find my mute button.
In these lines, we can perceive a shift in the artist's intention, initially embracing and welcoming change, but later rejecting it. How can we then grasp an evolving work as the artist sanctions certain alterations, restricts others, and her sanction is itself subject to change over time? In tracing the identity of this work, can we parse difference not as a negative value, but as a productive ingredient to Knowles's ever-changing proposition? The assumption that sameness and difference are mutually exclusive can be traced back through a long history to traditional Western metaphysics that privileges the rational, stable, and transcendental mind over and above the changing, deteriorating flesh of the body. Departing from this tradition offers another way for thinking through the relationship between sameness and difference, not as separate processes, but as enmeshed in a dynamic dance towards the becoming identities of artworks. Citing the African-American poet Amiri Baraka, performance and theatre studies scholar Rebecca Schneider asks us to consider whether the continuity of artworks can be conceived of as a changing same, a gesture that conceives of staying the same and becoming different as two sides of the same coin. Rather than thinking of artworks as either the same or different, can we think of artworks as being both the same and different at the same time? Following Schneider's footsteps back to Baraka, Baraka writes about the changing same in relation to the entangled histories of African-American music and the formation of African-American identities. At each juncture, twist, and turn of these histories with roots in the transatlantic slave trade, African-American musical traditions have adapted to reflect a new and myriad diasporic expression of the South. These adaptations, while different, are not a loss of ancestral traditions, but a powerful mode of preservation that enables the survival of those very traditions in radically different contexts, sustained by communities engaging in cross-temporal dialogue with the past. These adaptations are a mechanism for the past to remain in the present, but remain differently, invigorated with a new vitality. All the while, to quote Baraka, rhythm is not just pulse, it is direction and connection. It is not just a hitting, but a wiring. It carries the current, a current of the same reverberating across difference. As we have already seen, for the identical lunch to survive, each iteration must be different, as it is made with the same but different ingredients, purchased anew each time. At other points, what constitutes the ingredients have also changed so that the lunch could have a new cultural life in Germany and Asia and in our canteen at the Buffet Nord in Bern. The sensory life of the identical lunch has also been enhanced by the sonic materiality of the identical lunch symphony, the potential of the work activated by the sound of the blenders. To conclude, change is a productive force of the identical lunch, one that brings communities together in diverse social settings. Each variation of the work embodies different varieties and intensities of change, but the identical lunch is preserved in these shifts, without which the continuity and creativity of the lunch would not be possible. In other words, the spirit of the lunch lives on through its many mutations. After all, perhaps our research appareau's staging of the work at the Prague in Bern paid tribute to the artist's most recent ideation. It appears, however, a step back in our appreciation of the identical lunch's changeability. Attempting to fix an artwork like the identical lunch through exact replication would not only be impossible, but also an attempt to master and subdue a work that, through difference, brings others together in the same act of convivial communion, consumption, and commemoration of the artwork's multiple manifestations. Fueled by the connections and inspiration that had bloomed around that longish table, we embark now on the next phase of our journey, hearing Alison speaking. I'm delighted when I get a letter from someone who is doing the lunch somewhere and I'm given an account. That is my greatest pleasure, when someone takes the piece and does it in their own context. Thank you.